To a lot of you, I'm sure this opens itself as a bit over the top and might even give off an obnoxious vibe, but to me, this was something fresh and exciting. With all the incredibly popular and successful AAA titles like Halo, Call of Duty, and just general FPS games, which were still popular around the time, to see this kind of game was a real breath of fresh air and a real break from all the realism to show a more creative side that the game industry had to offer. Castle Crashers is probably my most played game when I was a kid, and to this day I still go back and continue to play through it, unlock new characters, abilities, items, and it's still just so much fun whether you're playing by yourself or in a party. There's always some fun to be had just messing around with all the fun little mechanics, and it's easy to pick up and play. Nature was always a quality of the game I really enjoyed. You never have to get fully invested or anything like that, just hop on in and have fun. Now, before we jump into the game itself, we need to give a little bit of a backstory to the studio created by Tom Fulp and Dan Paladin, the Behemoth. It's created many games like Castle Crashers and originally started out on Newgrounds, a site where many games and animators started out, and some still remain today. Their first big hit game was Alien Hominid, another side-scrolling game that had over 20 million players on that site and was immensely popular, enough to even be brought over to console, which created the studio itself. When starting Castle Crashers, you open the game with a choice between 4 different main magical knights, which specialize with some sort of elemental ability unique to each of them. There could be more if you bought DLC with the game, but to keep it simple, I'll stick with these main 4. The 4 main ones include fire, lightning, ice, and poison, all being reasonably fun choices, and with it not allowing anyone to play the same characters in multiplayer, it creates a sort of goal for what kind of character you want to create around a certain playstyle, which leads into the next system being leveling. It works pretty similar to a lot of other games, basically being every time you kill stuff you get XP, pretty simple but effective when done right. You were given 4 main bars you can put your experience levels into, which will improve and unlock certain abilities depending on what you put your experience into. If you wanted higher damage, you'd go for the strength category, and if you wanted higher damage and more magic attacks, you'd put it into the magic one, and so on and so forth. Overall, it being simple works perfectly with the kind of game they were trying to go for. A more substantial part of the game I'd like to cover is the general combat mechanics. These are also pretty simple but quite effective. It works by giving the player light, heavy, and of course simple magic attacks to start off with. Then as you progress and level up through the game, you unlock new movement and combo mechanics, which with this being the simple game that it is, it really helps to spice it up sometimes and keep it fresh and interesting alongside giving the player something else to work towards. It also mixes up all kinds of attacks, giving the player further control of their movement to work your way around hordes and merciless enemies. To touch on enemies a little further, there is no shortage of creative, wacky, and straight up crazy creatures for you to fight in this game, all coming with their own strengths, weaknesses, abilities, and even bosses. A lot of these enemies also become a playable character depending on who you want to unlock. You might have to complete the game with another certain character or complete certain levels on Insane. If you're looking to get a specific character, checking out what path you'd have to take to get a specific one would definitely be worth checking out. And there's no shortage of information on the wiki page about a lot of the aspects of the game either. In terms of bosses, which I touched on a little bit earlier, they're another interesting aspect that Behemoth decided to introduce to the fantasy style game. Typically every few levels, or generally throughout the different territories, you will encounter a boss designed around that part of the map. I personally found these pretty fun to play against, and with each one having weird attack patterns and something unique about them, I always found myself interested in what kind of boss would be coming up next. There were also quite a few really noticeable ones, so listing all of my favorite would be a bit hard, but to narrow it down to a few, the giant demon with the sock puppet and the corn on the cob were definitely ones I had a lot of fun playing against. The demon dragon would always attack you if you got too close to the sock puppet, and the cob would throw off kernels every time you damaged it, and they would heal you, which was always a fun little concept to me. Alongside the main campaign mode, there's a few little mini games which have been added to go with it, such as All You Can Quaff, Back Off Barbarian, and the Standard Arena. I had quite a bit of fun with these personally, and they work better if you're playing it with friends, but for me, I just kinda got a bit bored with it and went back to the campaign to unlock more stuff there. Throughout the playthrough of the game, you'll stumble across no shortage of both weapons and pets. With weapons, some of them will be simple and straightforward, like giving basic buffs or basic downgrades depending on what you pick, along with typically having a unique look depending where you found or bought the weapon. For example, a lot of the lower level items were goofy, like having broccoli, stretched out chicken, and even spaghetti meatballs as swords, and the higher level stuff was a lot more polished, while still keeping a bit of a light heart to them. You had cool looking ones like the dragon and necromancer swords, while also running around with golden chainsaw and a funky golden skeleton club. There were so many to pick and choose, you could really see the time and effort put in to just make the game that much more lighthearted. Humor throughout the game, while being quite crude, was also very apparent and set the game up with a more lighthearted tone. I mean, you can only ever imagine how funny 10-year-old me found various different animals shitting everywhere and being used as a game mechanic was. And the crudeness altogether just made it that much more memorable for me. Another more memorable part of the game was the soundtrack. I can't even begin to tell you how much I loved it and how many times I've listened to it over and over, and to this day, 9 years later, I'm still listening to it. Behemoth really came together and made it so fitting with the game, it's crazy. Different levels and bosses came with their own theme tunes and really set the mood perfectly. Whether it wanted to be a more lighthearted moment or slightly more intense, it had it all covered perfectly. And one of the songs has even been used in another popular mobile game called Geometry Dash, and featured on a level named Jumper, which surprisingly a lot of people seem to think that's where it originated from. Around the time of Castle Crash's release, Lego was another popular toy I was into, and at first hearing that, I'm sure you'd be probably confused on how this relates to anything, but the first content I actually made on this channel was Lego Castle Crash's stop motion animations. It was probably the main thing that got me into making YouTube videos to begin with, and with a total of 5 episodes of remade game levels, they managed to amass a total of over 25,000 views, which for a channel with less than 100 subscribers at the time, I'd say was pretty good. During the making of this video, I actually managed to find a few of the characters I had made for the animations as well, which I'll throw up on screen now, including a thief, barbarian, and a red knight, and a pretty smashed up necromancer as well. It really shows what kind of stuff you can make when you have a finite amount of free time. Now, although they weren't the highest of quality to say the least, the amount of time and effort I spent on them gave me a much greater appreciation and perspective for other stop motion channels and just animation in general. When I was sitting there using a free stop motion software on an iPod with give or take 10 frames per second if I was feeling generous that day. Now, it is a shame that unfortunately I can't show you any of these, as I went on a trigger-happy deleting spree the minute I decided to switch over to commentary-esque videos, but you're not really missing out on a whole lot, but it feels good to say that I didn't start doing YouTube playing Minecraft using Bandicam or Fraps. The style of music they went with really complemented the simple yet effective art style that made it really stick out from a lot of the gritty games that were out at the time, and what you saw was what you got. They made a lot of the emotions and expressions pretty vivid and unforgettable once you saw them, and it also worked with the weapons which I mentioned earlier, which were quite goofy, and the art style made them just pop that much more. Overall, the game is easy to just pick up and play solo or with friends, and even though it seems kind of 50-50 whether you'll love it or hate it, I would still highly recommend picking it up regardless. It's actually been released over onto the Nintendo Switch, which actually gave me the inspiration for this video, and it seems like it will be a great addition, alongside all the games they've currently got on there, and I personally can't rate it enough. I'm certainly interested in what Behemoth has planned for the future to see what wacky titles they'll put out. But that honestly wraps up this video, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one, hopefully not in a month.